There is one single behavior that will tell everything about a person the moment success arrives. Not what they say, not how they smile, not even whether they show up to celebrate. One specific thing, and if someone does it, it doesn't matter how long they've been around, how much history exists, or how much they claim to care. The relationship needs to end, not be paused, not be discussed. Ended. Most people have already seen this behavior and dismissed it as something minor, something explainable, something forgivable. By the end of this video, the reason it is none of those things will be completely clear, and the name of that one behavior, along with exactly how to recognize it in real life, will change the way every relationship is evaluated from this point forward. Stay until the end, because the final part of this video reveals something about this behavior that almost nobody talks about, and it may be the most important thing here. Success does something extraordinary to a social environment. It functions almost like a chemical test. It reveals the true composition of every relationship around it. When things are stable, when life is ordinary, when someone is in the middle and not at any particular extreme, relationships can look healthy for a very long time. There is no pressure, no contrast, no trigger to expose what is really underneath. But the moment something genuinely good happens, a promotion, a business breakthrough, a new relationship, a public recognition, a financial improvement, a personal transformation, everything shifts. And not everyone shifts in the same direction. Some people move closer, their warmth becomes more visible, their interest deepens, their support becomes more active, more genuine, more present. These are the people whose relationship with someone was never about what that person could offer them in terms of status or need. It was about who that person actually is. And when that person grows, these people are genuinely glad. But other people move differently, not always away. In fact, the most dangerous response is not the one that looks like distance. The most dangerous response is the one that looks like closeness but feels wrong. The one that shows up dressed as support but carries something else entirely underneath. And that something else has a name. It is called social comparison, disguised as concern. And in its most recognizable form, it sounds like this. That's great, but are you sure you're ready for this? Or, I'm happy for you, I just worry about how this might change you. Or, success like that can attract the wrong kind of people, just be careful. Or even more subtly, a joke that lands slightly too sharp. A comment that diminishes the achievement just enough to take the air out of the room. A story about someone else who had the same success, and then failed. This behavior, this one thing, is the subtle undermining of someone else's success by a person who claims to support them. And it is the single most reliable indicator that a relationship has no real future, regardless of its past. To understand why this behavior matters as much as it does, it's necessary to understand what it reveals about the person doing it. Because this is not about a bad day, it is not about someone being temporarily insecure or going through a rough patch. When someone consistently responds to another person's good news with a quiet poison, with a dampening, a diminishing, a subtle redirection toward doubt, it exposes something fundamental about how they actually view that relationship. They do not see it as a partnership between two people who are each trying to build a good life. They see it, consciously or not, as a comparison, as a competition. And the other person's success has just changed the scoreboard in a direction they don't like. Psychologists refer to this as benign envy's darker counterpart. Research in social psychology distinguishes between two forms of envy, one that motivates a person to improve themselves, and one that motivates a person to reduce the other. The first kind leads to effort. The second kind leads to behavior exactly like this, the subtle undermining, the quiet diminishment, the concern-shaped criticism. And research is unambiguous about which kind tends to surface in close relationships, when the social gap between two people suddenly widens. A concrete example of how this plays out in real life. A woman in her early 40s spent years building a small business while balancing a demanding family life. When the business finally crossed a threshold she had worked toward for nearly a decade, she called one of her closest friends to share the news. The friend's first response was not congratulations. It was a question. Wow. So what does your husband think about how much time this is going to take? Not cruel, not openly dismissive, but aimed, precisely aimed, at the softest point of insecurity available. The achievement was real. The doubt was planted anyway, and what made it particularly insidious was that it was packaged as care. This is the signature of the behavior being described here. It does not arrive as hostility. It does not look like jealousy. It looks like wisdom. It looks like the voice of experience. It looks like someone who cares enough to ask the hard questions. And that packaging is exactly what makes it so effective and so damaging. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes this behavior land as hard as it does. When something good happens, a person is in a state of elevated emotional openness. The good news has lowered their defenses, increased their trust, made them want to share something precious with people they care about. They are in that moment more vulnerable than usual, not in a painful way, but in a hopeful way. And when someone uses that openness to deliver a quiet punch, a comment that introduces doubt, a story that reframes the achievement as a problem, a joke that makes the room feel smaller, the impact is disproportionately large. The emotional registration of that moment is much deeper than it would be under ordinary circumstances, and it leaves a mark that outlasts the conversation. This is why people who have experienced this pattern often describe a specific and uncomfortable memory, the exact moment they shared something they were proud of, and watched a particular person's face, and felt something deflate, not because of what was said on the surface, but because of what was underneath it. The tone, the timing, the slight curve of the mouth that didn't quite look like joy. These are not imagined details. They are real perceptions that the nervous system registers and files, even when the conscious mind tries to dismiss them. Now here is where the pattern becomes even more important to understand, because this behavior doesn't always happen in one dramatic moment. Often it accumulates. It starts small, a comment here, a slight there, a just being realistic caveat attached to every piece of good news. And because no single instance seems significant enough to confront, the person on the receiving end adjusts without realizing it. They begin to filter what they share. They stop bringing their best news to this person. They learn, without being explicitly taught, that this particular relationship is not a safe place for their successes. And the relationship quietly becomes something smaller, something more guarded, something less honest, because one person in it cannot tolerate the other person winning. That dynamic, that slow erosion of trust and openness, is enormously costly, not just because it diminishes one relationship, but because it shapes behavior across many relationships. People who have been repeatedly met with this kind of response, when sharing good news, eventually develop a reflexive hesitation before sharing anything significant. They begin to manage other people's potential reactions before they've even had the conversation. They downplay their own achievements in advance, almost as a preemptive defense. They have learned from repeated experience that being visibly successful, or happy, or excited, makes them a target for something unpleasant. And that lesson, once internalized, is very hard to unlearn. Researchers studying social environments and what they call de-energizing relationships, relationships that consistently leave a person feeling drained, diminished, or worse than before the interaction, have found that these relationships have measurable negative effects on performance, well-being, and what psychologists call psychological safety. The same studies find that even one or two chronically de-energizing relationships in a person's close social network can significantly offset the positive effects of many healthy ones. The math of relationships is not neutral. The negative ones don't just fail to contribute, they actively subtract. And this is why the title of this video is not an overstatement. This is not a call to cut people off at the first sign of imperfection. This is a recognition of something specific and serious. When a person consistently responds to another person's success with behavior that undermines, diminishes, or quietly poisons the moment, they have revealed something about their orientation toward that relationship that cannot be fixed with a conversation, cannot be managed with more communication, and will not improve with time. It will only become more present as the gap between where someone is and where that person wants to be continues to grow. Because here's the hard truth. This behavior doesn't decrease as someone becomes more successful. It intensifies. Every new achievement, every new milestone, every new level of visibility or recognition is a new trigger for the same response. The person who planted a seed of doubt when the business hit its first breakthrough will plant a larger one when it doubles. The person who made the slightly sharp joke at the promotion will make a sharper one at the next one. The pattern is not situational. It is structural. It is structural. It is part of how that person relates to the idea of someone close to them having more success, more visibility, more momentum, more happiness than they currently have. Now here is the question worth sitting with, the one that makes this topic genuinely complex. What about the people who do this without realizing it? Because the reality is, most people who exhibit this behavior are not consciously malicious. They are not sitting in private, calculating how to undermine the people they care about. They are dealing with their own internal experience, their own disappointment about where they are, their own fear of being left behind, their own history with feeling unseen or outpaced, and that internal experience is leaking into their responses in ways they may not fully understand. This doesn't make the behavior less harmful, but it does change the question of what to do about it. Because when the behavior is coming from unconscious insecurity rather than deliberate strategy, there is sometimes, not always, but sometimes an opening for honest engagement. A direct, compassionate, non-accusatory conversation that names the pattern. When I share good news with you, I often notice something that feels like it's trying to take the excitement down a notch. I don't think you mean it that way, but I want to tell you what I'm experiencing. Some people, when offered this kind of honesty, will hear it, will sit with it, will recognize themselves in it, and want to change. And when that happens, the relationship can become more real, more honest, and ultimately stronger than it was before. But there is also a recognizable response that closes that door. When someone is confronted with this pattern, and instead of reflecting, they deflect. They say the other person is being too sensitive. They say they were just being honest, just being realistic, just playing devil's advocate. They say success has made the other person arrogant or defensive. They turn the observation into an accusation and position themselves as the wounded party. This response, this particular kind of reversal, is itself the clearest possible signal. It means the behavior is not accidental, it means it is protected, and something that is protected will not change. When that response appears, the decision becomes simple, even if it is not easy. Not because the person is a bad human being, not out of punishment or bitterness, but because continuing to invest in a relationship where success is treated as a threat is a choice that carries real costs, not just emotionally, but in terms of what becomes possible. The environment a person surrounds themselves with shapes what they believe is achievable, what they feel permitted to want, and how quickly they move toward their own potential. A social environment that contains people who consistently quiet that energy is not a neutral factor, it is an active one. There is a body of research in organizational psychology and behavioral science on what is called reflected best self, the idea that people perform closer to their potential when they are in environments where their strengths are seen, acknowledged, and reinforced. The opposite is also well documented. People in environments where their achievements are minimized, where their confidence is regularly undermined, and where success creates social friction rather than celebration, tend to self-limit. They hold back. They play smaller. They internalize the message, not the words, but the felt message, that growing too far, too fast, too visibly is dangerous. This is why the relationship environment around someone during a period of growth is not just a nice thing to think about. It is a strategic necessity. The people who are close during important transitions, who have access to the excitement, the vulnerability, the developing confidence, have real influence. Their responses register deeply. Their approval or disapproval, their enthusiasm or their quiet skepticism, their presence or their absence, all of it lands in a meaningful way, and that influence can either amplify what's being built or quietly dismantle it. The most successful people across almost every field share a behavioral pattern that is worth noting. They are extraordinarily deliberate about who is close to them during important chapters of their lives, not because they are elitist or selfish, but because they have understood, sometimes through painful experience, that proximity is not neutral. Every person in a close social circle is either contributing to the energy required to build something meaningful or drawing from it, and the contribution doesn't have to be financial or tactical or practical. It can simply be the consistent, genuine experience of being around people who are glad when good things happen. That experience, being genuinely celebrated, not just tolerated, is rarer than it should be, and recognizing it when it exists, and protecting it when it's found, is not arrogance, it is wisdom. Just as recognizing its absence, and being honest about what that absence means, is not cynicism, it is clarity. There are people in every life who will be present during the difficult years, who will share the struggle and the uncertainty, who will be there through the season of building, and when the building produces something, when the effort finally turns into a result, those people will look at that result and feel something warm and genuine, not because they benefit from it, not because it reflects well on them, but because they actually care about the person who built it. Their joy will be immediate, uncomplicated, and real. It will not come with a but. It will not contain a just be careful. It will not pivot to a story about someone who tried something similar and fell. Those people are the ones worth keeping close at every stage of life, but especially during growth, because growth is when the character of every surrounding relationship is finally and fully revealed. The people who rise with someone who genuinely want to see further and further, who ask how high without a ceiling in mind, who share the excitement without needing to qualify it, those people are extraordinarily valuable, and the contrast they provide makes it easier to see clearly what the other category actually is. The one thing described in this video, the subtle undermining of success by someone who claims to care, is not a small flaw in an otherwise good relationship. It is a fundamental incompatibility between what that person needs the relationship to be and what it would have to become in order to support genuine growth. It cannot be overlooked, it cannot be outgrown, and it cannot be resolved by becoming smaller, quieter, or less visibly successful in order to keep the peace. The peace that comes from shrinking is not peace. It is a slow erosion of the self in service of someone else's comfort, with the gap between you staying narrow. And no relationship, no matter how long it has lasted, no matter how much history it contains, no matter how genuinely complicated the feelings around it are, is worth that price. Recognizing this one behavior, naming it clearly, and making decisions based on that clarity is not about building walls or becoming someone who operates without trust or warmth. It is about building a life where the closest relationships are the ones that make growth feel safe, that make ambition feel permitted, and that make success something to be shared rather than something to be hidden. That kind of relational environment is not a luxury, it is a foundation, and it is one that every person, at every stage of life, deserves to have and to choose deliberately.